Well, there's been a victory of sorts for employers as the Fair Work Commission late last week ruled in favour of getting workers back into the office post-COVID. The Workplace Tribunal ruled salary packaging provider Maxxia had, quote, reasonable business grounds to reject an employee's request to work from home exclusively. Joining me now is Nationals leader David Littleproud. A bit of a random topic to talk to you about today, but I think it goes to, the broader parts of getting the economy moving, particularly CBDs, and where it all goes from next year. What do you think? Do you think this is perhaps a precedent-setting ruling?
Well, I hope so. I think there's a small win for common sense. I think employers should have the right to be able to have a certain percentage of the time that their employees turn up to the workplace, if not all the time. That's hopefully an arrangement they can get on a mutually agreed basis, but if they can't, then there should be a basis for which employers can have their employees in the office to make sure that there is productivity, there is coaching, there is development of their employees. And I think this is a good announcement by the Fair Work Commission. There was only one of the Fair Work Commission bench that made this determination, so the unions are saying this isn't a precedent, but I think it's something that many businesses are grappling with, particularly small businesses as well. But I think it should be a precedent and one in which I think makes sense.
As Nationals leader, what does this mean for regional rural Australia? I don't imagine many farmers can work from home, for example, but if you live in the regions and you work for a bigger company and you are allowed to work from home, isn't there a bit of a good aspect to all of that? Makes our country a little bit more connected and doesn't leave, well-educated people who still want to live in the regions can still live there. They don't have to move to the cities. For these big jobs, I mean.
They can,
yeah.
And they continue to do that. And we're demonstrating that in the regions now. In fact, when I was the Agriculture Minister, I had Department of Agricultural people working in Stanthorpe, about 60 kilometres down the road from here in Warwick, that were able to actually work at home, but then obviously move in and go into Brisbane sometimes during the week to be able to undertake other tasks. And that's the balance and the flexibility that you want. And the regions are able to do that, and particularly that if we provide the infrastructure in the regions, and corporate Australia has already much provided many of that infrastructure for their workers to be in the regions and to have that balance between working at home and in the office. And I think this is about common sense and getting the balance right, getting to a mutually agreed position. Some jobs you don't necessarily have to be in the office at all, or very small portions of the time. So it doesn't actually have any demand on you being in a physical office, but others where you do and there's a team environment, I think it is important that employers have the ability to have their employees in there, to be part of that team, to be part of their coaching, part of the development of their business and their employees as a whole.
Now, for the better part of this year, David Littleproud, every Monday we've been talking about The Voice. It's now a month, or more than a month, since that was soundly defeated. But it's then gone really quiet. There's a problem there, isn't it? I mean, I think Australians learned over the last year at least the real challenges, particularly in remote Indigenous communities. Is this something that you don't want to talk about till next year? Are the solutions perhaps not that easy? Or can we get the show on the road here?
Yeah, no, on the contrary. In fact, the week after the Voice referendum, Peter Dutton and I moved a motion to have a Royal Commission into Aboriginal child sex abuse in remote communities, and that was soundly rejected by the government, despite the fact that we wanted to actually do something of significance, as well as moving down the pathway of ensuring that the money, the over $4 billion that goes to the NIA every year, is being spent effectively through an audit and making sure that there are KPIs about where that money's being spent. The government said no, they don't want to talk about this, they don't want to take our hand, and in fact now they're saying that they're working through a treaty. Now, the treaty process was part of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. There was voice, truth and treaty. The government hasn't been clear, and the Prime Minister hasn't been clear whether he'll follow a treaty pathway, and we're saying to this government that the Australian people rejected the voice, they're going to reject the treaty. They want real outcomes for Indigenous Australians where there is disadvantage. There isn't disadvantage right across this country. We've got to acknowledge that. But that's why Peter Dutton and myself came back to the Parliament because that was a very strong message that the Australian people gave the Prime Minister, that he'd wasted $450 million of their taxpayer dollars on a voice. Had it been about recognition, it would have got up, and he divided our country, and they wanted us to get back to work. Peter Dutton and I took that message clearly, and we'll continue to take that message.
I mean, in the Royal Commission, that didn't work. You know, the government didn't agree to that. And you, on this program, have said the problems are well articulated. We need to get on with doing things that are going to change lives. And, you know, often you would say, we can't keep on doing the same thing. That is the definition of insanity. We've got to do something better. What is it? It's not really on the table. It's gone quiet. No one's talking about it.
That's why it was important to do that audit, Laura, to understand there has been a generosity of spirit and generosity of financial support by the Australian taxpayer. It just hasn't had the outcomes in specific areas that it should have, and we need to understand why. And that's why an audit was so important, to understand the value for money that the Australian taxpayer is getting out there. We know to the postcode where the challenge is, so it's important that we understood what had gone wrong and that we set clear parameters around the use of Australian taxpayers' money and what outcomes we expect, and to be able to run the ruler over that. That's what you need to change straight away. That was the common sense solution that Peter Dutton and myself brought back to the Parliament the very next week. And we stand ready if the Prime Minister wanted to pass legislation in the House next week, we would be there ready to take his hand. We see this as important, but unfortunately they seem to be thinking and saying that they're just going to stand back and do more consultation. Well, the consultation is over, and I think it's time for new Indigenous leadership as well. The old Indigenous leadership has taken us to the voice and to a referendum that has lost. The Australian people said that's not the pathway. I think there's time for new Indigenous. Well, I think there's new leadership like Dean Parkin should step up and take hold of this and actually understand what the Australian people want to happen. And the message that he gave is that there is a generosity of spirit, and recognition is down the track in one form if we get the process right. But this is about the here and now, and they expect that the money that they're prepared to close that disadvantage is spent wisely. And I think that is where there's an opportunity of leadership in the Indigenous community, but also for governments and oppositions to take their hand and make sure that there is accountability for the money that we're spending.
All right, we'll speak soon. Thanks so much as always.
Thanks for having me.